keep getting these made up conspiracy theorists trying to tell me how the World Trade Center conspiracy came about, how people planted bombs in a building. I think they did put bombs in that one building because they said it was either destined to be destroyed before the towers came down, or it caused the towers falling caused them to plant explosives in it to bring it down or something. And that's what that newscast was about, is the reason that small building, I don't know, building 7 or whatever it was. Anyway, when back in 61, 62 or something like that, when the Japanese architect got the bid apparently on the design of the World Trade Centers, somebody found out that I don't know who they were, but they said that, it started out that Jews didn't get the contract, and they thought that, well, why would you have you've never been to war with the Jewish people, and you just got out of a war with Koreans and the Japanese. And so they were trying to say, why would the Japanese get a contract, that big a contract in the U.S., even though I don't know if he was American or whatever he was. But it was like, how could they give the contract for something like that? Why wouldn't they give it to Jewish architects to come up with that? But anyway, being that the Middle East is a big giant conspiracy, and all the religions there came from Jewish people. I think, I don't know if it was Muhammad was Jewish, and then he turned, then it became his following for whatever, and all the religions basically, except for like Hindu and Buddha, and whatever other sparse ones there are, came from Jewish religion, or what Jewish stole from the Egyptians and the pagans. And then they made their own story on it to make it sound like, well, it's not them, it's us. Anyway, so all the Middle East is basically all the same. And for them to get control over the planet, which is like their one world theory of without anybody knowing, because it was planned so long ago that it's broke up, 2,000 years. If somebody planned something 2,000 years ago, and it was only word of mouth, and it was just basically turned into them, then nobody would know about it. It'd be almost like a secret plan that nobody would know about. So, all of Middle East, whether they say they are or not, but even though there are a lot of, they're mostly Muslim, I guess, whatever they are not necessarily Jewish, but they're all Middle Eastern. And the religions were there basically to break up and unite, how you could unite and break up. But anyway, break apart for everybody else, not realizing that they're all one race, and therefore when they spread across the continent or the planet, that nobody would realize, they say, well, these people are Jewish and these people are Muslim, so you're going to have the same amount, if it was only allowed certain amount of a certain race in, then you could say, well, yes, but they're Jewish, or but they're Muslim, or they're whatever. So you could have 2 or 3 different religions, but they're all the same race getting into a country. Now, that might have been 100 years ago, it might have been 1,000 years ago, where they only allowed a certain race in, because now, I don't know how they do it. It doesn't matter how they do it now. I'm just saying, kind of, how everything that people don't know about is actually happening, even though nobody's told them about it or written to them about it in the news. Anyway, So you got all the Middle Eastern is Middle Eastern and not necessarily the same religion. Although you're thinking, well, we already knew that, but anyway. So the Jews didn't get the contract, or the Jewish, however you want to say it. I take it the Jews are basically, I don't know, born Jews, and they practice. They're really heavy into practicing. The Jewish, or they accept, they accept that they study a certain religion, but they don't necessarily practice as hard as Jews, or something like that. Or maybe a Jewish is like one of the parents is Jewish and the other one is whatever. Anyway, whatever, however they discern that the way that they call themselves, whatever. So anyway, they didn't get the contract, but they started a conspiracy. But see, if you're say you're a group, or say like a mob boss, and it's kind of like that story where what is it in Snatch, where the guy says the guy's talking on the phone about Frankie Four Fingers, and he's saying, okay, I sent you a guy with a jewel the size of whatever. He goes, you gotta take him out, but don't make it look like you're taking him out, because we don't want to get blamed for it. Well, that's basically how a conspiracy works. Is the people or group that starts it, they do it in a way, it's almost like, that's what I basically call criminal insanity. That, and the people carrying out it has different variances, but the person, the group, or whatever that starts the conspiracy and is never connected with it. So they basically started the rumor that, they or whoever, maybe religious historians, started the rumor that the Twin Towers were evil, because it's written in there. Who knows? I don't know where it's written. I'm not a freaking religious historian, but the actual pre-story to what their evil towers are in whatever religious text came from Nefertiti. And she had a priest in her kingdom, or whatever they called it back then, that he was practicing alchemy. And he lived in a tower, and she didn't want him practicing alchemy because she didn't think it had anything to do with religion. It was just more, it was like anyway, I don't know what happened back then that caused her to go against alchemy, and whatever belief you have about alchemy. But anyway, so she built towers that were jutted up in the sky, and apparently her castle, or her where she lived was in one place, and then in front of her, wherever it was situated in a way, it must have been to the would have been to the north. It had to have been to the north of her, because if she built towers to keep him from being able to read and study in his towers, it was dark, and she built two towers up so that it would block the sunlight going into his tower that he was studying this alchemy in. So it would be hard for him to have any sunlight. So she built them up. So she was south of wherever he was, and built these towers up to shadow out his tower, to keep him from being able to study this alchemy, because she didn't want him studying it, because she didn't think it had anything to do with what was, it was evil as far as she was concerned. Maybe not evil, but it was later thought, whoever thought she was building the towers, and maybe the priest thought she was evil for building the towers to keep him from doing freedom, free to study on his own. So maybe the priest, so maybe religion goes around just claiming what's evil, and she was actually, it's just all not a misunderstanding. I don't know what the word for it would be, but so anyway, these two towers she built up were found to be called evil by whoever or whatever way they found it to be called evil. That's what, anyway. And so it later got wrote into religious text, but it wasn't written that it was her towers in that story. So basically, a lot of religion, it might have had something to do with something, but it didn't have actually, it wasn't actually telling the truth. They had their own way of telling a story, so that's how everybody is. They get a hint of something that people believe, or they think somebody else will believe, that they'll change it to way to them to say, well, it's really us telling the story, and it's really us that found this truth, and we're not. And they don't actually say that. Well, the story actually came from something that happened that was real, but they're not going to say that what they're talking about came from something that happened real. They're saying it was real from whatever religious standpoint they're trying to make. So anyway. So that leads up to the Twin Towers being called evil because of this story of religious text that nobody went to study and say, oh, it's just about Nefertiti not wanting this guy to study alchemy in her kingdom. Okay, so freaking email. Okay, so she's okay. So to nowadays, so they spread the Jews wanted this contract. They thought they could push They thought if they got enough rattling going on, they could push this. Whoever it was that accepted the bid for the Japanese architect to do the Twin Towers into their way, because they was kind of pushing that it was, I don't think they pushed that it was evil, but they used other means. But anyway, it got pushed around. It got pushed around to where it went out into the Middle East is basically, that what I just said is how they're all related, but they don't claim to be related because 1,000 years or 2,000 years ago, all the religion split them up, and they weren't bound as a people, but they are bound as a people when they realize that it's religion that's dividing them, and it's all for the exploitation of other countries for them to move in and take over the world. But they're not going to admit that, because whatever boundaries they set back 2,000 years ago as the thoughts and minds is controlling them to a certain time where they'll all actually believe at the same time that they can now take control, and that's probably that would be the Messiah, where everything is, as far as I'm concerned, the Messiah is where they're gonna mess everything up, and the Sharia is going to be where they're, it's none of this is going to be religious. It's just a word to claim where all the Middle Easterns come together and take over the world. However, way in economic, say it's like they all take a robotic economic turn, and as much money as they spend in all this stuff, they could take over robotics. Have a giant area. All they got is desert. They could put so many factories there that were all robotic, and they wouldn't need to breed, and it'd make all the people there rich if they didn't breed. But see, people breed to because they think they're going to get a job. But if they basically tell everybody, hey, don't breed because this is all going to be robotic, and they could take over economically. So anyway, so they spread this. That's a totally different story. That's whether that's happened or not. They could take over economically. They could take over. Well, they've tried to take over religiously, and they basically do. They got everybody brainwashed that all this stuff is real. A lot of people go to church because, well, it's a social gathering. A lot of people go there, well, it's business contacts, or people look at me different, or it's a social outlook and all this stuff. How many actually believe that this happened? I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. But all I know is they're killing all these animals in the process, and that's the reason I don't like religion, because religion takes animals as a non-necessitative reality in a fake scenario. So anyway, these Jews get this stuff spread in the Middle Easterns, and they know there's people that are naive to fact, and they'll hear something, they won't care where it came from, and say it landed on the ears of maybe not necessarily bin Laden, but the group who I think bin Laden was out to. I think he originally started building roads or something, and he was rich, and he might have wanted to start out and be known for doing something, and then this group that maybe the workers were like, say they were like communists here in the U.S. If there was a group of communists here, and there was a guy, a guy that was building a developer, and he was in charge, and he was funding this area of development, and all these communists came to work for him, and they started touting him up, and he started saying, yeah, he was their leader, but he didn't realize they were communist, and he was, being built up by them, and he was like, oh, happy. He started hanging around them, and then all of a sudden, it opens up that they're terrorists. Well, anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I think Bin Laden was starting out building roads and stuff. Now, not necessarily. He might have been radicalized early on, but it might not have been a total radicalization. Maybe he was just ticked off. It doesn't matter. I don't know him that much. But what I'm saying is, I think, even though I think he was scared into leading the Taliban. I think this group, they built him up, and by the time he realized who they were and what their plans were, and that they basically claimed that he was their leader without him realizing it. And then by the time he realized that he was already claiming to be the leader, and they basically outed themselves as terrorists, maybe to him, or however it happened, or they slowly said, we're going to do this, and he started agreeing with stuff, and maybe saying, yeah, this person, they said, well, this guy did this or this guy did that. I'm not saying this is true, because I don't know how it happened, but then he just had to assume, out of fear, that he was their leader, and they possibly planned this, because I know that the Taliban, there was a slow process. There was a real slow process. Now, what caused them to be such a slow process, and ISIS to be such a fast process, is taken over, because Taliban, you heard about this and that, and a lot of stuff is like radicalized, like groups like the Ku Klux Klan. They're claiming that they're not, they've veered away from what they thought what they used to be as in the South, as the hanging and everything like that. Now, I'm not saying, I've never met one, but what I'm saying is the possibility of what society accepts as what other people say, because that other person saying it might just be radicalized against a group because of whatever situation. Everybody, there's situations, the reason people do stuff, they all have situations. So anyway, like the Klan is saying nowadays, how they didn't tell this person to kill, and it's somebody, they might have been to a meeting, and a Klan meeting, and the Klan saying we hate this and we hate that, but they're not, and then this person says, well, if they hate them, how come they don't do anything? If they hate them, how come they don't do anything? And then this individual or a couple individuals take into themselves to do a killing, say like a church, or a bombing of a church, or a shooting of a little girl on a park bench, and then they say, well, there was a Klan, and the Klan says, well, we didn't have anything to do with that. We didn't plan that. And then they say, well, but what happens is people, they don't like people's talking, and then they can't handle. See, these people that are talking this, they're not going to ever do it, because they know they don't want to spend their life in jail, and they know it's going to radicalize somebody else, whether they do or whether they know that there's people who can't handle the patience of these guys, and so these people are let in around, but not necessarily part of. And that's kind of what a lot of these terrorists that are these terrorists that say they've been radicalized, whether they went over and radicalized or they just did it on their own. Like some of these terrorists have said they were part of ISIS, and ISIS says they never talked to us or whatever. But I think Bin Laden, he just figured, well, there's no way he's going to get out of or being part of the Taliban, and anyway, back in the maybe early '60s or late '60s, early '70s, that ISIS were the younger group. The Taliban were these older. I don't know if the cleric. I'm not. I don't study that stuff, but they were the older guys. The Taliban. I don't think there was Taliban back then. I think they were just plotters of what they kept saying what they wanted to do or what they was going to do or what they were planning to do or what they could do, what they'd like to do. And these young guys were like, get up and get up and go and get her done and stuff like that. But they basically they started. I believe they came in. The originators of ISIS came in, and they might have been done some work for the Taliban. They might have whatever work they did, whatever it was. They might have done some stuff, some this, that, or that. I right now offhand, I'm not going to be able to say, but they might have done some stuff, and then they just thought, man, these guys are all talk. They don't do anything. We're the ones doing it, and they're making money and getting all this respect. So what I think happened is ISIS, and they basically the Taliban was saying, oh, these I don't know. I don't know if they picked up because tourists, how tourists are, especially the Americans. They go to another country and they think they own it, and everybody should bow to them. But this ISIS was planted. I don't know if it was these Taliban guys that got together, and there was some ISIS group of ISIS originators. They weren't actually ISIS at the time, but they were in this meeting, and they were saying how they, Taliban said they'd like to clean up the place, and ISIS said, oh yeah, we'd like to get some garbage trucks and go around picking up all the garbage. Now, whether that was a sarcastic comment from them or whether that was just a joke saying, we'll do that. We'll get garbage trucks. We'll make money. So they said, are you going to give us money to buy these garbage trucks? And the Taliban was saying, well, we're not, basically, I think they got into an argument because the Taliban they thought it was all talk, and they were doing all the work for the Taliban. While these Taliban were just sitting around getting notoriety, and these ISIS guys were nobody.